first presidential debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, moderator Chris Wallace asked Donald Trump to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, as we saw in Kenosha and as we've seen in Portland. Trump replied, sure, and then when asked to go ahead and condemn them, he instead said, I would say almost everything I see is from the left wing, not from the right wing. And when pushed, he said, what do you want me to call them? Give me a name. Who do you want me to condemn? And Biden said, Proud Boys. And Trump replied, Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. But I'll tell you what, somebody has to do something about the Antifa and the left. This is not a right-wing problem. This is a left-wing problem. Yikes. I mean, I know this isn't shocking. We all already knew that Trump is a white supremacist, and we knew that he has no hesitation saying the quiet part loud, because his supporters are also white supremacists who don't care what he does or what he says. And he's publicly encouraged his white supremacist supporters in the past. Like after one of them murdered a protester, he said that there were very fine people on both sides, one of the sides being white supremacists. But this is a new horrific step further in which he has actively encouraged white supremacists to commit acts of violence against the left and anti-fascists. His party is scrambling to explain it all away. And of course, they can't. And in some cases, they're making things worse. Like when Rick Santorum went live on CNN right after the debate to say that Trump didn't condemn white supremacists because Trump doesn't like to say something bad about people who support him. Oops. You may tell yourself that telling the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by instead of stand down was maybe just a grammatical error, and saying somebody has to do something about the left was just a disconnected thought. And by somebody, he didn't actually mean the Proud Boys need to do something about the left. Sure, Trump himself says that he didn't even know who the Proud Boys are at the time, and in those remarks, in which he said that, he regularly did confuse the phrase stand down with stand by. He said, just stand by. Look, law enforcement will do the work. They're going to stand down. They have to stand down. So clearly, I mean, he's an idiot and he doesn't know the difference between stand by and stand down. A brief aside about his remarks during that particular moment, he also said to reporters, as people see how bad this radical liberal Democrat movement is and how weak, the law enforcement is going to come back stronger and stronger. I just want to point you over to Umberto Eco's 14 Signs of Fascism, in which number 8 describes a group that describes their enemies as being at the same time too strong and too weak via a continuous shifting of rhetorical focus. That's literally what Trump does in a single sentence here by describing liberal Democrats as radical and saying how bad and also how weak. Just a thought. Anyway, back to the Proud Boys. Regardless of Trump's intentions behind the words he said during the debate, what matters is how the white supremacists understood what he said. And spoiler alert, they think he meant to tell them to go murder liberals. President Trump told the Proud Boys to stand by because someone needs to deal with Antifa. Well, sir, we're ready. Standing by, sir. Trump basically said to go fuck them up. This makes me so happy. They even made a little logo out of Trump's words and put it on a t-shirt and started selling it to each other. It's interesting that the initial debate question was about condemning white supremacists in general, but it turned to focus on the Proud Boys in particular. That was a mistake on Joe Biden's part for saying that, because it does allow Trump to pretend that he doesn't know who the Proud Boys are. He surely does. I know he's an idiot, but he's got to know. And that shifts the conversation away from the fact that Trump never actually condemned white supremacists' violence in general. And it's important to note that the Proud Boys are just one organized network of white supremacists. There are many others. This is all relevant to a recent report from two journalists, Robert Evans and Jason Wilson, who gained access to the Patriot Coalition of Oregon, a far-right coalition of anti-fascists, which, if my math is correct here, would make them fascists. The Patriot Coalition are allies of the Proud Boys, and their chat logs reveal how they organize and how they encourage one another to amp up their extremist violence. The Patriot Coalition used a tiered system to try to hide their true activities and their true purpose, starting with a public Facebook group that had more than 1,500 members before it was eventually archived. Members of that group could petition to be let into a private GroupMe channel, which had about 100 members. There was a vetting process that attempted to weed out anyone who wasn't serious about their pro-Trump, pro-police stance. Luckily, that process wasn't entirely successful because a leftist from Eugene, Oregon's Antifa Collective managed to get in, take screenshots, and then forward the username and password to the two journalists, along with all of the screenshots, so that those journalists could go into the group and verify the screenshots were accurate. Evans and Wilson speculate that the Patriots' vetting process gave them a false sense of security that allowed them to be completely honest about their true intentions. So, for instance, there's a lot of evidence showing that they would plan peaceful pro-police demonstrations during the day, while then planning to commit acts of violence against Black Lives Matter protesters after sunset. In fact, at one point, in August, they actively planned to go shoot people on the streets one night, but Antifa protesters showed up and outnumbered them, scattering them and scaring them into leaving. I've talked a lot in the past about how online forums can create echo chambers that lead to radicalization, which in recent years has mostly involved young white men who push one another into violence against women and other marginalized groups. These chat logs really show that happening in real time. Like when a woman says in the chat that her neighbor is flying a Black Lives Matter flag, and she was considering knocking on her neighbor's door and explaining to them that she finds the flag upsetting and hurtful because this was a day after the murder of Jay Danielson, who was a member of the far-right group Patriot Prayer. He was killed in Portland. And that woman was then flooded with comments telling her that her neighbors are basically going to murder her. The first reply, the journalists write, comes from Dan Medford, who urges her to keep quiet because the enemy is hunting patriots right now. You go over there and say something, you paint yourself a target. Another member quickly agrees. An individual with the username Dub insists that White Bear, that's the lady, her neighbors, don't care one bit if it hurts you. They are all about pain and destruction and have zero qualms about hurting you also. So after a lot of back and forth, the woman changes her mind. And instead of communicating with her neighbor, she decides to hang up a Trump flag in her yard and put mouse traps on the back of it. Then the conversation moves on to how they need to start shooting protesters in response to the Danielson murder. I highly encourage you to read the entire report on the Patriot Coalition in case you harbor any mistaken beliefs that these pro-Trump, pro-police demonstrators are just cosplaying when they open carry their weapons. Or if you think that people like Kyle Rittenhouse or James Alex Fields Jr. are just lone wolves acting independently of any greater plan or coordinated radicalization attempts. Fun fact, while I was trying to remember Fields' name, I found this wiki page for far-right extremism, and I noticed that the United States has so many examples that it's the only country they had to split up by era. Either that's all due to Wikipedia's US bias, or it might suggest other places tend to have their fight with fascism once and then learn their lesson. And we in America just keep doing it again and again and again. These groups are out there continuing to radicalize mostly white conservatives, and the president of the United States refuses to condemn them because they are his base. Keep that in mind, please, when you cast your vote next month.